mother's words echoed in the sterile living room, the same room where Dad had spent his last days. "Let's split the inheritance fairly," she said, her voice soft but firm. I managed a smile, a perfect, practiced curve of the lips. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and the unspoken weight of a lifetime of slights. I looked at her, at the woman who had always favored my brother, Mark, who had always dismissed my ambitions as unladylike, and my successes as pure luck. This was the day I'd been waiting for. This was my moment to finally get what I was owed. For years, I'd watched her pour money into Mark's failing businesses and pay off his reckless debts. She called it helping him get on his feet. I called it blatant favoritism. I, on the other hand, had worked my way through college, built a successful career in finance, and never once asked them for a dime. My accomplishments were met with passive nods and a quick change of subject back to Mark's latest triumph, or more accurately, his latest disaster. The sting of their indifference had hardened me, turning the love I once felt into a simmering resentment. The lawyer, a man with a tired face and a pristine suit, laid out the will. Dad's fortune was substantial, the result of a lifetime of savvy investments. It was all to be split equally between Mom, Mark, and me. "Fairly," my mother had said. I nodded in agreement, a knot of pure satisfaction tightening in my stomach. They thought I was on board, that I was the good daughter, accepting my share and moving on. They were wrong. My plan was already in motion, a meticulously crafted strategy to reclaim what was rightfully mine, and then some. The smile I wore was not one of agreement, but of victory. This was just the beginning. It's easy to judge, but you don't know what it's like to be invisible in your own family, to have every success you earn be overshadowed by someone else's failure. So, if you've ever felt like your efforts go unnoticed, hit that subscribe button. Maybe you'll see a little of yourself in this story. The first step of my plan was subtle. I needed access, and my background in finance gave me the perfect cover. I offered to help Mom organize her new accounts, a generous gesture that she gratefully accepted. We spent afternoons in her study, a room filled with Dad's old books and the scent of pipe tobacco. I set up her online banking, creating complex passwords and security questions that only I knew the answers to. As I did, I noticed how easily she trusted me, how she rattled off her personal details without a second thought. It was almost too easy. Mark, meanwhile, was oblivious, too wrapped up in his own self-pity and his latest get-rich-quick scheme. He was already talking about using his inheritance to open a vintage car restoration shop, a dream he'd had since he was a teenager. Mom listened with the same doting expression she'd always worn, encouraging him, offering advice, and promising to help him get started. I watched them, a silent fury burning inside me. He was going to squander his share, and she was going to enable him, just like always. It was a familiar pattern, one I was determined to break. I spent my evenings poring over Dad's financial statements, identifying the most lucrative accounts, the ones with the largest and least monitored balances. The numbers were staggering, a testament to his quiet brilliance. I felt a pang of something that might have been sadness, a flicker of what could have been a loving memory. But it was quickly extinguished by the cold logic of my mission. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, the kind of justice that comes in the form of a bank transfer. Weeks turned into a month. The autumn leaves outside Mom's window turned from green to a fiery red, a silent witness to my meticulous work. I had set up a series of dummy corporations, shell accounts, and a complex web of transactions that would make any auditor's head spin. The money I was siphoning off was being moved in small, untraceable amounts, a financial ghost in the machine. I was a phantom, and they were none the wiser. I moved through my days with a sense of calm, a quiet confidence that my time had finally come. One afternoon, as I was helping Mom with a grocery list, she brought up a memory from my childhood. "Remember the time you built that elaborate treehouse with just a few old planks?" she asked, a small smile on her face. You were so determined. The memory was a distant, fuzzy thing to me now. My mind was focused on the present, on the millions I was rerouting, the future I was building for myself. I gave her a polite nod. Yes, I remember. But I didn't. I had built that treehouse with my own 2 hands, but it had been Mark who got all the praise for it. I was just the girl with a little boy's dream. My carefully crafted system was a thing of beauty. The money was flowing into my accounts, little by little, like a slow-moving river. There were no alarms, no red flags. I was a financial ninja, invisible and deadly. The satisfaction I felt was immense, a deep, resonant hum that filled the empty spaces inside me. I had finally found a way to be seen, to be acknowledged, and to prove that my determination was worth more than a passing comment. The weeks passed in a blur of spreadsheets and silent victories. The weather grew colder, the sky a constant, brooding gray. I'd successfully moved a significant portion of Dad's inheritance into my own name, a secret a few $1,000,000 at a time. I felt a sense of power I had never known before. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the vindication. Every transaction was a defiant whisper, a quiet act of rebellion against the years of being overlooked. Then, the first tremor. Mark called Mom, his voice a frantic buzz over the speakerphone. "Mom, something's wrong with the bank account," he said, his usual cocky tone replaced with panic. "The numbers are off, a lot off." My heart pounded in my chest, a thrilling, almost euphoric beat. The moment of truth had arrived. I watched Mom's face fall, her hand trembling as she held the phone. "What do you mean, off?" she asked, her voice thin. "I just checked it yesterday." I knew she hadn't checked it. She'd looked at the summary I'd prepared for her, a pristine, doctored document that showed everything in its proper place. She hung up, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and fear. "He says some of the money is missing," she whispered, looking at me as if I held all the answers. I played the part of the concerned daughter perfectly, my face a mask of shock and worry. "That's impossible, Mom. Let's call the bank right now." It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. As she frantically dialed the bank's number, I felt a smirk tug at the corner of my mouth. The money wasn't gone. It was just where it was supposed to be, with me. And the best part? No one would ever suspect the quiet, dependable daughter. You see, a story is only interesting if it has a villain you can't help but root for. If you're enjoying this journey into the dark side, remember to like and subscribe for the next chapter. The bank's response was a masterclass in bureaucratic deflection. "We see several large transfers, all initiated from your secure accounts, ma'am," the representative stated, their voice maddeningly polite. Mom's face grew pale as she listened, her hand gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles were white. I stood by her side, a picture of false sympathy, my mind racing ahead, planning my next move. She hung up, her eyes locking onto mine. "They said I authorized the transfers," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But I didn't." I feigned shock, placing a comforting hand on her arm. "That's a mistake, Mom. There must be some kind of fraud. Let's call them again, together." And the thought of her questioning my involvement never even crossed her mind. She trusted me implicitly, and that trust was my greatest weapon. Mark, on the other hand, was not so easily placated. He burst through the door an hour later, his face flushed with anger and disbelief. "What happened, Mom? Where's the money? We were supposed to start the business," he yelled, his voice echoing through the quiet house. I watched him with a detached curiosity. The golden boy, finally having to face a problem he couldn't charm his way out of. I saw his world crumbling, and a part of me felt a cold, hard satisfaction. "I don't know, son," Mom said, her voice cracking. "The bank says it was me." Mark turned his furious gaze on me. "Did you see anything? You were helping with the accounts, weren't you?" His eyes were filled with suspicion, a tiny seed of doubt he'd planted. I met his gaze, my expression calm and sincere. "I set up the online accounts, yes," I said, my voice steady. "But I didn't have access to the funds. Only Mom did." He stared at me for a long moment, searching for a lie. He found none. The house had become a tomb of unspoken accusations. My mother, once a vibrant, chatty woman, now moved through the rooms like a ghost, her movements slow, her eyes vacant. She would sit for hours in the sunroom, staring out at the garden Dad had meticulously cared for, a place now choked with weeds. The silence she carried was a heavier punishment than any words she could have flung at me. It was a silence that screamed of a broken trust, a betrayal so profound it had stolen her ability to speak to me, to even look me in the eye. I saw her shoulders, once held with a quiet dignity, now slumped under the invisible weight of a loss she couldn't comprehend. She hadn't just lost money. She had lost her sense of reality, the idea that her children, her family, were safe and good. The sight of her, so fragile and lost, did nothing to stir my conscience. It was a cold, hard fact of war. Casualties are inevitable. Mark, on the other hand, was a ticking time bomb. The cool, entitled facade he'd always worn had cracked, revealing a frantic, desperate man underneath. His phone was a permanent fixture in his hand as he made a never-ending stream of calls to lawyers and police, each one ending in frustration and rage. The authorities' message was simple and unyielding. The transfers were all logged as legitimate, authorized by the account holder. The legal system, a complex web I knew how to navigate, offered no help to a man whose greatest assets were his charm and his mother's money. I had a front-row seat to his downfall, and the satisfaction was immense. The grand dreams of a vintage car shop, the endless stream of future ventures he'd regaled us with, had all vanished. He was left with nothing but the bitter reality of his own carelessness and my cold, calculated precision. His beautiful, easy life had turned into a desperate, futile quest for justice. One particularly stormy evening, as the rain lashed against the windows, I found Mom sitting in Dad's old armchair, a photo album on her lap. The scent of old paper and the lingering memory of his pipe tobacco filled the air. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she was whispering to herself. "I don't understand," she murmured, her voice a thin, reedy sound against the drumming rain. Who would do this? The question hung in the air, a plea from a broken heart. Not for the money, but for the reason. For a fleeting moment, a sliver of the little girl I used to be, the one who craved her mother's approval, surfaced. A pang of something that felt like guilt, sharp and painful, pierced my hardened shell. But it was quickly smothered, drowned out by the years of neglect, the constant favoritism, the dismissal of my worth. This wasn't about her pain. It was about my justice. This was the price for a lifetime of being invisible. The police investigation stalled, a dead end with no leads, a cold case before it had even begun. The lawyers, expensive as they were, found no loopholes in the meticulously crafted paper trail I had created. The bank's stance was unwavering. The transfers were authorized, irreversible, and entirely legal on their end. Mom's share of the inheritance was gone, a digital phantom that had vanished into the ether. Mark's share was also gone, as I had ensured he was a cosigner on the same accounts, a beautiful little detail that had sent both their fortunes down the drain. As they were consumed by panic and the legal fees that were now piling up, they failed to notice that my own share of the inheritance, which I had taken control of from the start, was perfectly secure. They were left with nothing, and a mountain of debt, while I was free and clear. The final confrontation came on a frigid winter afternoon. The air in the living room was thick with a tension so palpable it was suffocating. Mark and Mom had cornered me. They sat me down, their faces grim, their eyes burning with a desperate, final hope for an explanation. "We've been talking," Mom said, her voice shaking, a stark contrast to the strength it once held. The police said the only person who had access to the accounts, besides me, was the person who set them up. Her eyes, once so full of unconditional love and trust, now held a cold, hard suspicion that chilled me to the bone. And the lawyer said, she continued, her voice gaining a slight tremor, that a financial professional would have been the only one to cover their tracks this well. The words hung in the air, each one a nail in the coffin of our family. I remained silent, my face a carefully constructed mask of innocence. I was a blank slate, refusing to confirm or deny their suspicions. Mark, however, couldn't contain his rage. He leaned forward, his face a mask of furious certainty. "It was you, wasn't it?" he hissed, the low volume of his voice more threatening than a shout. "You stole it. You stole everything." He had never been this direct, this confrontational. It was a new Mark, a man stripped of his privilege, and the change was fascinating to watch. I looked at him, at the entitled man-child who had always gotten what he wanted, and a bitter, vindictive triumph swelled inside me. "Prove it," I said, my voice as steady as a rock, a testament to my carefully controlled emotions. The words hung in the air, a challenge, a subtle admission, a final act of cold defiance. They had no proof, just their gut-wrenching, agonizing realization. They stared at me, the truth dawning in their eyes, replacing every flicker of hope with a terrible, agonizing clarity. The trust they had once had in me was gone, replaced by a profound sense of betrayal. I had won. But as I watched the tears roll down my mother's cheeks, a cold, empty knot formed in my stomach. The victory I had so meticulously planned and executed felt hollow, the taste of it bitter and metallic. The war had been won, but the spoils were dust in a lifetime of regret. The aftermath was a silent hell. My mother, heartbroken and betrayed, refused to speak to me. Her silence was a heavier punishment than any words she could have said. It was a weight that pressed down on me, a constant reminder of the person she once thought I was, and the person I had become. She had lost not just her fortune, but more importantly, her faith in me, the one person she had believed she could rely on. The beautiful, sunny house where I had grown up, once filled with warmth and laughter, had become a mausoleum of broken trust. Every room, every piece of furniture, held a memory I had corrupted. The scent of Dad's old books, the worn-out patterns on the living room rug, they all felt tainted by my actions. Mark was a different story. His fury simmered just below the surface, a constant, low-level threat. He tried to sue me, to expose me, to do anything he could to get a measure of revenge. But my legal team, paid for with the very money I had stolen from him, effortlessly blocked every attempt. The money trail was too convoluted, the evidence too circumstantial, and my legal representation too skilled. He couldn't prove a thing. I watched as he became a man consumed by his own rage, his life a relentless, futile pursuit of a justice he would never get. He was a cautionary tale, a ghost of his former entitled self. The charming, lazy boy who had always been the center of my parents' world was now a shadow, his grand ambitions turned to ash. I went back to my life, to my successful career, and my new, substantial wealth. The money was a comfort, a soft, luxurious blanket I wrapped myself in, insulating me from the cold reality of what I had done. I bought a beautiful apartment in the city, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto a sprawling, cold metropolis. It was the kind of place I had always dreamed of, a physical manifestation of my success. But as I looked out at the glittering lights below, I realized they were just so many distant, unfeeling stars. There were no family dinners, no calls from my mother asking about my day, no arguments with my brother about his latest scheme. I had everything I had ever wanted, but I was completely and utterly alone, a queen in a kingdom of one. Loneliness became my constant companion, a heavy, uninvited guest that took up residence in my beautiful, sterile apartment. I'd sit for hours on my plush sofa, staring out at the city lights, each one a distant point of light representing a life I was no longer a part of. The money, which was supposed to bring me happiness and validation, felt like a heavy chain, a constant reminder of the cost of my victory. It had bought me a beautiful life, but it had cost me everything else that mattered. I had won the game, but I was the only player left on the board, and the victory felt hollow, empty. The years passed in a blur of empty accomplishments and solitary evenings. My career flourished, my wealth grew, but the silence in my life was deafening. Then, one day, I received a phone call from an old family friend. My mother was sick, terminal. The news hit me with a force I hadn't expected. I flew back to our hometown, the familiar streets and landmarks, a painful reminder of a life I had so callously discarded. I walked into her hospital room, and for the first time in years, I saw her face without the mask of self-justification I always wore. She was frail, her body a fragile cage for a heart I had broken. Her eyes, once so full of a life and warmth, were now clouded with a mix of sorrow and resignation. "You took everything," she whispered, her voice a reedy sigh, barely audible. "Not just the money, but us. Our family. You took everything and left us with nothing." The words hit me like a physical blow, a sudden brutal shock to my system. She wasn't talking about the money. She was talking about the love, the trust, the shared history we had. I had seen her pain before, but I had never truly understood it until now. Until I saw her, so small and broken, on that hospital bed. I had stolen their inheritance, and in doing so, I had stolen their future, and a part of my own. My victory was a lie. I stood by her bedside, holding her hand, a hand that was now thin and cold, a fragile thing I was afraid to break. The silence in the room was louder than any accusation. I wanted to apologize, to tell her I was sorry, to beg for her forgiveness, but the words were stuck in my throat, a bitter, useless lump of regret. She passed away a few days later, her final gaze holding a pain that would haunt me for the rest of my life. It was a look that said everything, a look that conveyed her profound sadness and my complete failure. I walked out of the hospital into the crisp winter air, the cold a sharp slap to my face. The world seemed to have lost its color, the vibrant reds and golds of autumn replaced by a stark, desolate gray. Mark, his face a grim mask of grief and fury, was waiting for me. "I hope you're happy now," he said, his voice flat and empty, devoid of its usual rage. "You got what you wanted, but I wasn't happy. I had never been more miserable. The money was no longer a source of comfort. It was a constant reminder of the price I had paid for it. The victory I had so craved, the moment of sweet revenge, felt like a crushing defeat. I had spent my life seeking validation, trying to prove my worth to a family I felt had always overlooked me. But in the end, I had only proven my capacity for cruelty and selfishness. The loneliness I had felt in my expensive apartment was nothing compared to the emptiness that now hollowed me out. The legacy I had left was not one of success and wealth, but one of betrayal and ruin. I had won the inheritance, but I had lost everything else: my family, my home, my peace of mind. I had learned the hard way that some debts can't be paid with money.